perfect.
Can you turn your mic on, Liz?
I'm sorry, I called the meeting to order at 10:04, and I'm asking Mayor Martha Guerrero to lead us in the pledge.
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you. Can we have a roll call?
Good morning, Director Baumgarten.
Here.
Branscombe,
Yes.
Chapman,
Here.
Clarici absent, Guerrero for Early, Talamantes for Jennings.
Here.
Jones absent, Sander absent, Vice Chair Desmond,
Here.
Vice Chair Howdeshelt absent, Chair Lauren,
Here.
and ex officio member Tacker for Aceves.
Here.
Thank you. We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. We are now going to have a public comment period for items that aren't on today's agenda. We will have that comment period for up to 10 minutes and 3 minutes of speaking. Is there anybody here from the public who would like to address items that aren't on today's agenda?
There's no public communication.
Is there anyone online? No.
There is no one online.
All right, that's excellent. We are going to adjourn the transportation meeting at 10:05 for now and call to order the CRF Safe Committee meeting for Thursday, May 15th at 10:06. And I would just like to know if there are any changes in the roll call for this meeting.
Thank you, Chair. We'll note for the record the absence of Directors Rickman and Singh, our safe members.
Thank you very much. In this agenda, I would like to ask if there's any public comment on items that aren't on this consent calendar agenda, or if there are any comments for the consent calendar at this time from the public. Seeing none and seeing none online, the consent calendar will be presented by Sekov.
The consent item for the safe meeting is the approval of the minutes from the March 6th CVR Safe Committee meeting.
Excellent. I'm looking for a motion.
I'll move consent.
All right, we have a motion and a second on the consent item. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. On the action item, we have an action item to approve and release draft CVR safe fiscal year 2025-26 budget, and it will be presented by Ms. Barbara Van Bechtold. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Barbara Von Bechtold. I'm the Program Manager for the Capital Valley Regional Service Authority for Freeways and Expressways, or CVR SAFE. So we've developed a draft fiscal year 25-26 budget for the CVR SAFE for public review and comment. The CVR SAFE is comprised of El Dorado, Sacramento, San Joaquin, Sutter, Yolo, and Yuba counties. And the revenues from the CVR SAFE are collected through a $1 fee that's assessed at the time of vehicle registration in all of the participating counties. The draft budget before you, which is shown in attachment A, estimates the cost for operations and maintenance of the core call box system and for enhanced services and projects, including the Freeway Service Patrol, Intelligent Transportation Services staff, the 511 system, and the Big Data and Open Data Hub projects. The CVR SAFE bylaws do require that the budget be approved before July 1st of each fiscal year. So today we're asking that the CVR SAFE Committee recommend to the CVR SAFE Board to approve the release of the draft fiscal year 25-26 CVR SAFE budget for public review and comment, with final adoption anticipated in June, so next month of 2025. The draft CVR SAFE budget will be posted on our CVR SAFE webpage if approved for release later this month at the board meeting. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about the item.
Do the directors have questions on this item? Clarification? Seeing none, I'd like to ask public comment on the question on this item. Is there any public comment?
There's no public comment.
And no public comment online? All right. Yes. Director
Look,
Branscombe.
this probably isn't that important a question, but I'm looking at the revenue lines and registration fees is the biggest number. And I'm probably displaying my ignorance, but who pays the registration fees?
Individual drivers who register a vehicle with the state of California within the 6 counties that make up the Capital Valley Regional Safe Area.
The registration fees.
Yes,
Okay.
it's a $1 fee that's added to everybody's vehicle registration.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, I'm looking for a motion on the action item approving the release of draft CVR Safe fiscal budget as presented.
Move approval.
All right, we have a motion by Desmond and a second by Bloomgarden. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. At this time, we will adjourn the CVR Safe meeting at 6:10. And we're going to open the transportation meeting, and we will be beginning the transportation committee meeting for 5:15 at the consent calendar. Is there a presentation at all of the consent calendar, or should I just mention the items? All right, there are 4 items on consent: approval of the minutes, engage, empower, and implement grant reallocation, approval of the scope change for City of Marysville Sustainability Mobility Program project, and asking for approval of the scope of change for West Sacramento's Great Delta Trail. Are there any questions? We took public comment on this item previously. So I'll be looking for a motion on this consent calendar.
So moved.
All right, we have a motion by Sanders and a second by Guerrero. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, opposed? Motion passes unanimously, and I'm appreciating the pace of the meeting right now. All right, we have action items before us today, and we'll begin the action items. The first action item is a request for project funding transfers, and Miguel Mendoza will be presenting. Welcome, Miguel.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Morning committee. I'll try to keep the pace going for you here. So the name is Miguel Mendoza. I'm an analyst working on programming and delivery. I have an action item before you today regarding a fund transfer request from one of our project sponsors. Before going into detail about the request itself, I want to mention that these are requests that you may be seeing moving forward. And that's because it involves funding that's been awarded by the SACOG board during from a regional funding round. When SACOG board awards funding to during a round, that means it's awarded to the project and not to the sponsor. So essentially that means the sponsor is not able to reallocate funding to something else that was not explicitly stated within the application and the award. And so occasionally, though, it may make sense to transfer some funding to achieve a scope of work or an outcome, but it just means that perhaps that scope is in another project. So when that does happen and there's merit in the request, we'll come before the committee and board to ask for that approval. This specific request today, we have 2 projects. Both are managed by Caltrans District 3. So we have the State Route 51 Managed Lanes project, and then the State Route 51 Bridge Deck Replacement project. Just to note, because it was for my own notification as well, State Route 51, also known as Business 80, also known as Capital City. There's some history there that I think is interesting to explore. So the request, I don't want to bury the lead, is for $350,000 of SACOG awarded funding to be moved from the Managed Lanes project to the Bridge Deck Replacement project, specifically to be used for the construction and construction management of a Class 1 bike path on the bridge. So it's very specific to that scope. To go over briefly about these 2 projects and what they're doing, the Managed Lanes project, as the name will describe, is a Managed Lanes project. It actually starts on Highway 99 on the 16th Avenue exit, extends, if you're going north, past the American River, and then stops 0.3 miles south of the Fulton interchange. For fellow golfers, that's the Fulton interchange is where Hagen Oaks is, or if you prefer, where the car dealerships are. And so it's a pretty long project, but the scope, aside from the managed lanes, also includes some interchange modifications, widening the bridge over the American River and adding new lanes to that, as well as modifications and construction of bike paths on within the project limits. Very specific to this request is that Class 1 construction of a Class 1 bike path on the American River Bridge. It is part of the scope of the managed lanes. This project has previously received $16.9 million of SACOG funding in previous funding rounds. And it's currently in the pre-construction phases, right? So we most likely design or environmental, and it has a unfunded need. So the project is not fully funded, and it's still seeking funding to complete it. The estimated completion date is 2034 for the project, just for information. The second project, which would be the recipient of the $350,000, is the SR 51 Bridge Deck Replacement Project. Again, a good title, replaces the deck, but also widens the bridge but does not add extra lanes. Just widens it and then replaces the deck. This project limit starts a little bit before the bridge, if you're going northbound, and then stops at the first interchange after the bridge. So not a very long one, but within the boundaries of the managed lanes project. The project also, very importantly, constructs a Class 1 bike path on the bridge. We've confirmed that this is the same scope with the same work elements, exactly the same as the managed lanes. That work just happens to be in both projects. This one specifically was previously awarded $2.7 million by SACOG through the Regional Active Transportation Program funding round. And that 2.7 is going towards the construction of the Class 1 bike path. The Class 1 bike path construction itself costs $7 million. The 2.7 by ATP, and then the rest is actually being funded by SHOP funding. So forgive me if I get the full name wrong, but State Highway Operations Performance. Yes. Protection Program. Thank you. And the rest of the construction cost is also funded by SHOP. So just again, to recap, the $350,000 is being asked for your consideration to be moved from the managed lanes to the bridge for the Class 1 bike path for its construction and construction management. Same scope, same work element, same boundaries. And by doing this, hopefully we'll get that benefit to that area sooner rather than having that be built through the managed lanes project, which again, estimated to be completed in 2034 and still seeking grant funding. So with that, I'm going to close out and happy to answer questions. If there's any very specific questions, the PM for both projects is here, who's thankfully explained a lot of this to me, and will hopefully be able to give you any details you need.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mendoza. Are there clarifying questions or in-depth questions by any members or directors? Yes, the chair recognizes Ms. Guerrero.
Thank you. Sounds like a great project. So yeah, very supportive of it.
Thank you.
Thanks. Do we have public comment on this item?
There's no public comment.
All right. I think it sounds like a great project also, and be asking for a motion.
Second.
All right, so moved and seconded. Aye. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Seeing none, that motion passes, and thank you very much for your presentation, Mr. Mendoza. Awesome. Now we get to speak about mobility zone adoption, item number 6 with Kathleen Hanley. Really excited about this item, and welcome.
Good morning, Chair Lauren and Transportation Committee members. I'm Kathleen Aziz, Principal Planner on your transportation team, and pleased to come before you this morning with an action item related to mobility zones. So you've seen a lot from me and our Deputy Project Manager, Justine Resho Patel, last month on mobility zones. All of these updates on the analysis and the work we've been doing in partnership with your staff really culminates today at a key kind of midpoint on the project and this month later in the board. So I'm very pleased to present many months of work to you all here this morning. So we're requesting board action to designate 23 mobility zones across the 6-county SACOG region and adopt 10 of those 23 for phase 1, which is the amount we've been scoped to move forward with the mobility zones project. As a reminder, Mobility Zones is funded by a federal RAISE grant, Rebuilding American Infrastructure with Sustainability and Equity. And so this first 3 years of the project, the original scope that we submitted to FHWA is to do 10 mobility zones. So my presentation this morning is going to recap a lot of what was presented by Justine last month as part of an information item to the Transportation Committee and the board, specifically on how we identified those 23 mobility zones in partnership with the community and jurisdictional staff, and then the process that was used to prioritize 10 of those 23 to move forward for phase 1. The new information that's different from last month is really the work we've been doing to define the exact boundaries of those 10 that we're moving forward with. So I'll summarize that analysis and then talk a bit about what's next for the next year and a half of this first part of the project. So recap on last month. Mobility zones is really about identifying areas within the 6-county SACOG region that have both a high amount of equity need and a high amount of transportation need. The Mobility Zones project really comes out of SACOG's Racial Equity and Action Plan work. And so in addition to trying to use kind of a place-based approach here, it's really also about process and making the decisions with communities instead of for communities. So you'll hear me talk a lot today about the long and detailed process we've used to create this action before you. You see in this visual here, what we've done over the last year is identify by mapping the areas in the 6-county region that have the highest equity need. You may remember my presentation from December if you were on the SACOG board then, where we talked about how we went to the community and kind of dialed up different equity measures focused on different things in different counties. So using a bottoms up, focusing on seniors and low income folks in counties where that matters more, and communities of color, new Californians, those types of communities in other counties. We then conducted analysis on comprehensive transportation needs. So this is, where's the truck traffic that's providing a lot of pollution? Where are there gaps in sidewalk and bike lane infrastructure? Where's transit service not great compared to surrounding communities? And put all those comprehensive transportation needs together. As the visual illustrates, right, we stacked the equity needs and the transportation needs on top of each other to figure out which parts of the region might be good mobility zones. Through that process, we identified 23 rough areas in the region that are before you today for action as the 23 mobility zones. Now, this process relies largely on census information and some of the fine-grained analysis is imperfect, right? So I'm not here to say these are the only 23 places in our region that have substantial transportation or equity issues. But there's a high concentration from our analysis of equity and transportation issues on both. And we think there's a lot of opportunity to move forward different mobility improvements in these places over the next couple of years with the work on mobility zones. As I've mentioned, the original RAISE grant is only for 10. So we identified 23. So then we had to go through the hard process of trying to get 23, which is already a small number for a region with 28 jurisdictions, down to 10. And so we worked collaboratively with our community-based organizations who sit on our community committees to provide them information through what we call zone profiles. You can see that on the left, where we summarize a lot of the demographic and transportation challenges that we saw in each of the 23 zones and walked them through that to help them prioritize on a county basis which areas they thought were the most meaningful for SACOG staff to move forward. The full set of zone profiles is available in attachment E to your staff report. On the right, you can see we went through a process of ranked choice voting and 5 voting to build consensus among the community-based organizations that participated in this process. So did a round of voting, which ones you think is the most important for us to focus on in your county, and then worked through multiple rounds of ranked choice voting until everyone was in the sort of 3 to 5, I'm comfortable with moving forward with these options. After we had the prioritization from the community committees, we then took the ones that were prioritized by the community to the municipal and technical committees, which are the city and county staff, as well as our regional planning partners, our air districts, our transit operators, all the other folks who are important partners in delivering transportation improvements in our region. So we took that list of 12 that the community prioritized and said, hey, these are the 12 that came from the community. How do these look to you? And so we got some feedback from specific jurisdictions saying, the community prioritized this zone in my jurisdiction, but I really think this other zone is more important. And then we have a lot of projects we can move forward. And then with a larger regional lens, we got some feedback that there weren't enough sort of suburban and denser options on the list that were prioritized by the community. So you can see Rosemont, Western Rancho Cordova, Sunrise Kirby, and Taylor Road sort of came up from the jurisdictions to be considered for the list of 10 to kind of close that gap in place type that was considered. So then we took this list of 16 options, still trying to get down to 10, to the task force. So the Mobility Zones Task Force has 1 community representative from each county, 1 representative from the jurisdictions, and 1 representative from the jurisdictional partners. And they had to go through the same ranked choice voting and 5 process. It's very challenging to get to this prioritized list of 10, but it's extremely valuable, right? For me to sit and watch as community members and jurisdictional staff try to work through the challenges of regional prioritization is very rewarding and is really walking the walk on a lot of the work we have in our Racial Equity Action Plan. So these are the 10 phase 1 mobility zones that are before you for approval today. You'll notice on this map, which there's a copy of this map available as attachment B to your staff report, just has sort of boxes. We wanted to first go to everyone and say, which areas should we focus on? And then once we chose the 10, went through a process of refining those boxes into actual boundaries, which I'll cover in my next section. These 10 mobility zones, we think, do a really good job of representing the diverse equity needs that exist within our region. Only 5 of these 10 mobility zones are represented in the kind of top-down equity map that the state of California requires for most grant opportunities. What that means is that we've identified 5 places that don't show up when the state measures for us, right? Our grassroots approach is finding types of equity needs that we don't always see. 8 of these 10 mobility zones overlap with Green Means Go zones. So there's some opportunity for us to collaborate on the land use and the transportation side to try to support priority areas for your jurisdictions on infill. 3 of the 10 are places you have been or will go on a REAP offsite board tour to learn about those inequities. So you may remember going to Woodland and down to Florin with Director Jennings, and we'll be headed to Director Desmond's district next month. And then 9 of the 10 are aligned with the new federal administration's priorities for low-income families and federal opportunity zones. So we really think these 10 are a good set that have a lot of potential for us to seek, local, state, and federal funding and to advance mobility projects in these areas. So the focus to define each of those zones from those general boxes down to actual boundaries, we wanted to really consider real world conditions like roadways, rivers, railways, natural barriers that make sense to kind of hem in a zone. And also wanted to make sure that we were accounting for neighborhood destinations and challenges and opportunities that folks saw in this zone, including areas people identified as having a lot of crashes or safety concerns, but also places your staff told me there were projects, right? Want to make sure that we're building the zone in such a way that it's useful for us to leverage on work you're already doing at the local level. And so we used 3 streams of engagement to get this feedback to refine the zones. So we did in-person engagement across the 10 zones in the 6-county region for a month. We circulated a digital survey specifically to communities who live in those 10 places. And then I had individual meetings with each jurisdiction that has representation in each of those 10 places to make sure I could understand what they were working on and how we could be supportive of. This provides a bit of an overview of how the community engagement went. We met with over 500 people in person on this project and received more than 900 individual comments about needs and opportunities that communities are seeing in these 10 places. I've heard more things about this region and these 10 places in the last few months, even as someone who's a native of this region, right? Learning about the immense challenges of really, really unique places in our region. So we took the feedback from the community committees. We started with those original pink boxes that were on the map that you saw last month in the information item. And then we took the boundaries that the partner agencies and the communities drew. Part of the in-person engagement was like, put some transparency paper over the map and you draw a boundary to tell us where you think this zone should be. And then all of the locations where they identified either challenges or project opportunities and worked to kind of put that information together to draw a draft zone boundary that made sense. Those draft zone boundaries were then circulated to all of the jurisdictions who work in the zone to make sure that the zone made sense. Some minor street modifications, a couple came through, and all of that are before you today have been reviewed and the comments have been incorporated from those staff. The full zone boundary maps are available in attachment C to your staff report. So you'll see much more detailed versions of those maps if you have a map you want to look at in particular. So what's next for these 10 zones? We're right here this month, May, with an action item to finalize the list of 10 phase 1 zones with boundaries. Then we're going to go back out for another round of community and partner engagement through the summer, working on trying to develop a prioritized list of projects. So that's how we're going to end the year. So really doing more finer grain analysis on the needs in these zones. Now that we're not at a 6-county scope, there's a lot better analysis we can do with 10 smaller areas, right? And then trying to hear from communities, what kinds of solutions do you want to see? Work with jurisdiction to understand, is what the community wants feasible? Is it eligible for the funding that we have for mobility zones, and work through those together? So what you'll see from me later this year is a needs and opportunities report that summarizes a lot of what we heard in each zone, coming as an information item in September. Then we'll be back with the process that we're going to use to prioritize projects in November and trying to get a prioritized project list before you all for action in December. So just as a recap, the requested action today is for the Transportation Committee to recommend that the board designate all 23 of these mobility zones. We want to be clear that even though we're only scoped to do 10 from the original raised grant, we think there's a lot of merit in the other 13 places and want to make sure that we don't lose track of that. So that action today establishes all 23 mobility zones, but still designates the 10 we need to keep moving forward with the grant. And then the hope is that after we do this pilot phase of the 10, we'll take all those learnings, come back to the 13, and be able to move those forward as well. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
First, I want to thank you so much for your breadth of presentation. I think it was very, very clear. Do the directors have questions on this item or comments? Yeah.
And thank you, Kathleen. I also agreed. Thank you for all your work. Obviously a lot of work, a lot of different variables and factors that went into this. How do they overlay with the environmental justice communities that have been delineated in the various jurisdictions? Do you have a map that illustrates that?
Sure, with SACOG's environmental justice communities or the statewide SB?
The statewide.
Yeah.
Statewide.
So there's I can provide a separate map. I'll include that as an attachment to the board report so you can see it in
Okay.
map form, but let me get to the slide. Yeah, so this shows you, so with the orange dots here, state SB 535 disadvantaged communities, that's the Cal Enviro screen that we often see in required for state grant applications. So the boxes that have the orange dots indicate there's an overlap there.
Right. And I certainly, I'm aware, I'm familiar with the overlap in the Sacramento County ones. Yeah, if you have a better, more detailed map that you show me where it overlays, that would be helpful.
Absolutely.
And then, I mean, I'm very supportive of this. I think how it really helps us prioritize in these areas and really thankful for the opportunity for these raised grants to prioritize these areas. I think for us, at least in Sacramento County, it really also dovetails with a lot of the work that we are doing in these urbanized, unincorporated communities, and certainly in the city of Sacramento as well. We're working together on really being intentional on some of these older corridors and seeing what we can unlock in terms of infill opportunities, and obviously the transportation infrastructure is so crucial for that. So I'm very supportive of all 25 and certainly the 10 that we're beginning with. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Desmond. The chair recognizes Director Bradsfield.
Thank you. I've chatted with Kathleen before the meeting and to share concerns I have. I rarely raise my hand in favor of doing something for Marysville. Marysville has the state highway running north and south through it and east and west. On top of that, paralleling the north and south run is a rail line that is on a levee that goes to the city of Marysville. We have a significant economically disadvantaged portions of the city of Marysville. The equities are there, the problems there, the mobility problems there. And I know there's a lot of work in doing this, and the precision is, you look for precision, but all I'm hearing here is conclusions. I would be interested to compare the problem in Marysville that I just described with any one of these. And so I have a hard time looking at these conclusions without understanding, okay, the example, Coloma, Lotus, Georgetown, why? What exactly is there? And I'd compare the problem in Marysville, unless I'm missing something. I mean, again, who else is bisected by two state highways, pollution, noise, economically disadvantaged, significant portion of Marysville, economically disadvantaged. The equities are there, the problem is there, the mobility problem's there. And it was missed. It wasn't even, it's not even in the first cut. So with just seeing conclusions here and not being able to measure these specific issues at those that should have been selected, and being able to compare Marysville to these, I'm left with questions, real questions. And I know the methodology. When you go off and do these things, you have to cast a wide net. And are you going to catch everything? And so I don't want to come off as criticizing you, your team, or what have you. But even the best efforts can miss a big fish. And this is a big one, I think.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I just wanted to make a personal comment that I think that each of us knows our jurisdictions more than anybody else because we live in it, breathe in it, et cetera. And I think that that's within all of us, but I also think that it's pretty amazing that we're a collaborative body that, you know, does this deep dive and has staff like
Well, and
Kathy.
I
Go ahead.
will add, if I may.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
That I was talking with people inside Marysville and they don't remember being reached out on this. Apparently it was a county person and what have you. So it got missed. And it's a big miss.
Thank you. Before I call on Director Guerrero, is there any, do you want to make any comments to?
I'll
Director
just say I
Branscombe?
appreciate you giving me a heads up on this and this morning and certainly need to look into a bit more from a comparative perspective on what our analysis showed for Marysville versus the ones that were prioritized, which I can work on between now and the board meeting later this month. I'll also follow up and coordinate with your staff on the opportunities that were available to the jurisdictions just to make sure there's clarity. We did invite every jurisdiction in our region to quarterly meetings for the last year to work on the development of this project, but certainly never want one of our jurisdictions to feel like they weren't involved in something that happened at SACOG. So I'll follow up on that.
Thank you.
Thank you. I come into almost every meeting as a board of director member, looking out for the whole region. Rarely do I raise my hand. What about us? What about us? Well, I'm doing it here.
Appreciate it.
And I think justifiably. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Director Branscombe. The chair recognizes Director Guerrero.
Reviewing the data, I just have some additional observations about the area that was described. It noted Latino community. One of the other, is it, am I blocked?
Closer.
Okay, here we go. In noticing the community, it is a highly disadvantaged community compared to the state of California. I think we're at 22% compared to 12% statewide. It might be helpful to show some of the variances so that you can distinguish in comparison to statewide, if there's any way to notate that, so that so that we can demonstrate a little more the huge variances. And this part of West Sacramento, the Bright community is, I think, the highest percentage in the disadvantaged community. And if there's a ranking as well, either the variance or the ranking, that might be helpful for us to be more familiar with that concept. In addition, the community is highly refugee populated from the Ukrainian community and the Afghan community, Pakistani. It's just many communities that have moved in and migrated as a result of, wars happening all over the place. And so that contributes to the demand placed on our local resources to provide support. And in addition to that, via, thanks to your support, utilization or on-demand rideshare program, that area's highly concentrated use is more significant than the rest of the city, providing, the additional support that they need to get, from their first to last mile to their workplace, which is why that particular program is incredibly important. And I just wanted to convey some additional points about that. So thank you.
I appreciate that.
Thank you. Director Telemontes?
Thank you, Chair. So that we got $5 million to be able to identify the 23 mobility zones and now pick the 10 projects, correct?
So we received a $5 million federal raise grant that we matched with 1.3 of local SACOG managed fund. So the initial planning project I'm working on identifies 10 mobility zones and 6 projects to move forward. The SACOG board has previously taken action to prioritize carbon reduction program, which is one of the formula funds that flows through SACOG to implement this project. So there's about $10 million in funding to implement those 6 projects that come out of these 10 zones. So we're still narrowing here.
Okay. I guess one of my frustrations with like, whether it's the city of Sacramento and our transportation or Sacramento Transportation Authority or this, like, we're always spending money on studying. And like, we all feel the impacts of our horrible roads and lack of connectivity, greenhouse gas emissions. Like, we feel the impact in our communities, but I know as government, we have to like do these studies to be able to submit to get more monies. And it's like a whole process, but like for these $5 million, like what are the limitations and how fast can we like use this money to actually do the work on the road instead of more consulting fees and more studying and more outreach? Like, people want to see their taxpayer dollars at work. So like, is there any flexibility in these dollars to actually just get to work and use the money on the road?
Your sentiments are very aligned with mine as a project manager. So starting on here, I tried to save as much as I could to do actual project implementation. So I actually reduced the consultant contract original budget a little bit to try to reserve some of that funding to go towards implementation, which it will. But I will say about $2 million of the initial $5 million is going directly to our community-based organization partners who are helping us do this outreach work across the 6 counties, which includes providing food, paying community members to participate in this process. So while I completely agree with you, I do think the funding is going directly into our communities more than it often is in other projects.
Yeah, and I think that's where like, I think for all of us within our own jurisdictions, like how do we partner so we don't start like doubling the work? Because everybody always starts at ground zero and someone's already done the work. And so it's like, how do we share information and share data and work together better on this? So this is not just like SACOG, I'm just speaking in general. So, okay, that's all my questions and congrats on the new names.
Talamantes, if I could just build on Kathleen's comments on that, just to give you a little bit of context for the last few years. And Kathleen mentioned this in her presentation. One of the frustrations in our region is that for a statewide sort of lens on disadvantaged communities, there's lots of places in our region that don't show up. And that actually is key to basically unlocking and being competitive for state funds and from time to time federal funds. So what's been different about this, and we're hoping this is not just a one-off, we do a bunch of outreach and we throw it all away. But underlying these 23 zones are equity priority communities, right? And more engagement that's ever happened before. And I think Kathleen mentioned a number of these don't show up on those statewide maps, but they show up when we can turn the dials locally and define the equity and disadvantaged communities in ways that resonate. So we're hoping there's a shelf life to this and a benefit to it that goes beyond even hopefully the quick implementation of the actual projects that Kathleen just mentioned, but something that your jurisdictions and your staff across the region can help use to be more competitive, especially for state dollars.
Yeah, no, I love the outreach. I love the community work. I think like.
What I hear you saying is we don't want to just be doing this perpetually or throw it away each time, right? And
Yeah,
start
because
from
every
scratch.
10 years, I just feel like on every board I'm on, it's like, okay, we have to study to do this. And it's like, okay,
We understand.
yeah. So.
Yeah, I hear you.
Thank you very much for your comments. If there aren't any more,
Just
go
a
ahead.
quick comment,
Chair
thanks.
recognizes Bloomgarden.
Thank you. I just want to thank you, Kathleen. Seems like there's been a tremendous amount of outreach, a tremendous amount of work at the staff level. I think anytime that we get into doing something regionally, there's, lack of a better term, there's those that are going to get something and then those that don't. So I know it's tough and I just appreciate the work that you all have done. I look forward to continuing that work, especially the community engagement. I think that's awesome.
Thank you very much. If there aren't any other clarifications, I'd like to go to public comment. I believe there are 4 speakers today on public comment.
Thank you, Chair. We have 2 public comment for this item and then 2 others for other items.
Thank you.
Would you like me to go ahead and read
Yes.
those 2 in now? Okay.
Yes, please.
The first comment is from Director Howdeschelt. He's not here, but he says that he has comments on this item, not from PCTPA or Roseville, but his comments as Vice Chair of this committee. He says, let me applaud SACOG staff for undertaking an ambitious cutting-edge approach to identifying opportunities in the region to create parity in transportation modalities. The December presentation and Equity Priority Communities tool map showing home-based equity priority communities, EPC, destination-based EPCs, and both home-based and destination-based EPCs show the promise of increasing connectivity between communities, such as shopping destinations and communities that work there. Some of that promise is reflected in the 23 mobility zones identified and the 10 recommended Phase 1 mobility zones presented for consideration today. There is no doubt that there was a robust scoring and outreach process involved in identifying these mobility zones. However, I question whether some of the recommendations are a casualty of the process. For instance, should trips from the EPC be a standalone criteria or be offset by trips to the EPC? Were the community, municipal, and technical committees fully aware of efforts underway to increase mobility? For instance, in North Auburn, the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency is about to embark on the Highway 49 Sidewalk Gap Closure Project, which will construct approximately 2 miles of new sidewalks to close significant gaps along Highway 49 from I-80 to Dry Creek Road in the city of Auburn and county of Placer. The project builds upon the Caltrans Highway 49 roadway rehabilitation project completed in 2022 to enhance complete streets elements along the Highway 49 corridor. These two projects will improve sidewalk coverage in the corridor from about 27% to about 70% when complete. The project's funded with $14.4 million in active transportation program grant funds, $5.5 million in federal funds, and about $0.2 million in local funds. The ATP grant included a set aside for the Placer County Health and Human Services Department to develop and implement a Safe Routes to School program at 6 area schools, which was completed in 2023. In my opinion, the mobility zones chosen should serve larger population areas where the potential of increased mobility by non-auto modes are higher, not rural communities where people have chosen a lifestyle that does not require sidewalks on country roads. And that concludes his comment. Would you like me to read the second comment? This comment is from Katie Jackson with Placer County Public Works. She says, the area of North Auburn experienced significant growth during the gold rush in the 1840s and 1850s. As such, many of the roadways in the area are narrow, winding, and lack sufficient facilities for bicycles, pedestrians, and transit facilities. Today, North Auburn is a thriving community with retail shops, medical services, business parks, schools, and homes, all within biking and walking distance. While improvements have been made, more infrastructure is needed to support walking and biking to these local destinations. Caltrans and PCTPA are currently constructing sidewalks on State Route 49, but many of the side streets have no connecting sidewalks. Main roadways like Luther Road, Bell Road, Bowman Road, Loxley Lane, Dry Creek Road, and New Airport Road have significant sidewalk and bike lane gaps, and some have no facilities whatsoever. The Mobility Zone program could help fill sidewalk gaps to key destinations such as Bowman Charter School, Auburn Regional Park, the Loxley Lane Business Park, and the county's offices. Recently, the county has been working with parents at Bowman Charter School to design a sidewalk along a key segment of Bowman Road. This section of roadway was built in 1913 as part of the historic Lincoln Highway, as shown in a map that she provided. This segment of sidewalk would connect existing neighborhoods to the school. The superintendent principal provided a letter of support for the project, noting that students currently walk along the side of the road to reach the school. While there are many areas that need sidewalks in North Auburn, safe routes to school are a top priority. And that concludes her comment.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the comments. And I just wanted to add what I heard was that the CBOs were included. There was a measurement of physical barriers, proximity destinations, the environment, safety, multimodal infrastructure, transit, to find zones that don't generally show up on state maps and to use it across our region. And I just really appreciate the work on this and support it. And I'm wondering, are there any other comments by my colleagues, or might we be ready for a motion on the item?
Second.
All right, we have a motion by Guerrero and a second by Vice Chair Desmond. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Opposed.
Thank you. Motion passes with one opposed vote. All right. The next portion of our agenda today is the 2025 4-County State Funding Program Progress Report. And this, I'm not sure who's presenting today. I'm sorry. You need a microphone.
Good morning. David Pape, new principal planner here, working on funding and grants. So the purpose of today's presentation,
Can I interrupt you? David, welcome to SACOG, and it's really great to have you. We always welcome new presenters, and usually my colleague to the left will say something really embarrassing. So that didn't happen today, but you're just as welcome. So please continue. Sorry
thank
for
you,
the
I
interruption.
appreciate that. Yeah, so the purpose of today's presentation is to provide a refresher overview of the 4-County state funding program, as well as a status update on the application process. So as I just mentioned, I'll begin with an overview of the program covering key information, and I'll follow that with a status update and highlight some of the next steps. So the purpose of the 4-County funding program is to grant state transportation improvement program funds for transportation projects to public agencies in Yuba, Sutter, Sacramento, and Yolo counties. This round of the program includes both inter-county and pooled funding components. The inter-county portion of the program really emphasizes fix-it-first projects that include additional performance outcomes such as state of good repair, modal choice, climate, and equity. This portion of the program, agencies apply for the funds within their county allocation. And then there's a pooled funding, or what we're calling the regional set-aside, and this is intended to fund regionally significant projects, such as those included in the SACOG Regional Project Prioritization List. The regional set-aside portion differs from the inter-county in that it's competitive across all 4 counties. So the program is centered around 6 guiding themes and is designed to address fix-it-first needs, greenhouse gas reducing projects, and support the goals and targets outlined in the Metropolitan Transportation Plan. The program also aims to provide a greater balance between urban and rural needs and increase transparency and funding certainty. These themes are reflected through the program eligibility criteria, performance outcomes, funding allocation, and collaborative application process. The program seeks to fund a variety of project types. This includes rehabilitation and operational improvements for regional roadways that also include elements such as multimodal improvements, safety improvements, and regional goods movement. Additionally, the program supports projects that improve traffic flow, trail implementation, and other active transportation projects, and then finally public transit projects that increase frequency and service, and this also includes capital improvements. The program additionally supports projects that include elements that address climate adaptation and resiliency. And then finally, I want to note that the funds may be used for preliminary engineering phases, as well as right-of-way and construction phases. So as it relates to funding, the total estimated amount available is just over $42,500,000, with the available funding coming from fiscal year 27-28 and FY 28-29. As shown in the table, the funding is split between 4 counties based on statutory parameters, with the SACOG board electing to pool 10% of the funding for a regional set-aside. This allocation strategy is really designed to ensure that both regionally significant projects and inter-county initiatives receive support. The application and evaluation process essentially breaks down into 6 key steps. Each step is designed to facilitate communication and feedback between applicants and SACOG staff, with the purpose really to ensure that projects are aligned with the goals of the program and well prepared for evaluation. I'm not going to cover each of these steps in detail, but essentially applicants engage in an optional pre-application for early feedback and consultation. This wasn't a requirement, but heavily encouraged by staff, and we had good participation. Next, applicants are asked to submit a draft application for evaluation and scoring, revise based on feedback, and then submit a final application for final review. So as I just noted, there are 2 rounds of application scoring intended to strengthen applications and support applicants. Applications are scored by a committee of external independent experts. This includes experienced project engineers and planners. Applications are assessed using criteria approved by the SACOG board, and the evaluation focuses on local need, performance outcomes, community engagement, and project readiness. And to be eligible for funding, projects must score at least 67%, and this threshold is based on past funding rounds. We took a look at both maintenance and modernization as well as transformative funding rounds and the scores of projects that were awarded, and that's how we determined this threshold. So progress to date. The call for projects officially opened on May 17th. We began by hosting a pre-application webinar on March 19th to help applicants understand the process and prepare. Pre-applications were due on March 28th, and we held consultations from April 7th to May 1st. In total, we received 34 pre-applications from 17 jurisdictions, and our team held 17 individual consultation meetings to provide tailored guidance and discuss the results of the project performance assessment. The chart on the right shows a breakdown of the project types that were submitted during the pre-application phase. So as you can see, trails and active transportation projects were really the predominant applications we've seen, and that was followed up by rehab and transit projects. And then draft applications were due on May 2nd. In total, we've received 18 draft submissions. We are now in the evaluation phase, and so the committee is currently carefully reviewing each application, and I'll provide an update on the next step shortly here. So during the pre-application phase, there were several questions raised by applicants, and this is really understandable given this is the first time we've done a STIP-only funding round. A number of these questions were related to the state STIP requirements, while others tied more directly to the SACOG program guidelines. The chart on the screen shows some of the most common topics we've addressed. Again, I'm not going to go into detail on all of them, but 2 of the top 3 topics involved state requirements for submitting a project study report, as well as demonstrating a full funding commitment for the project or phase the applicant is seeking funding for. And then I would say the most frequently asked question or clarification was concerned around non-exempt project ineligibility. For the program, projects need to be exempt under federal air quality conformity regulations to qualify for the program. This is a SACOG requirement that aims to prioritize funds for smaller exempt projects that contribute to maintenance, air quality, and greenhouse gas reduction objectives. And one thing that may have been overlooked at times is that this is really consistent with past maintenance and modernization funding rounds. So it's not a new requirement, but definitely created some confusion. And then in response to all these questions, we took it upon ourselves to publish an FAQ to further support applicants. This was sent out, and it's something we can consider incorporating more detail into the future funding round guidelines. And then just in terms of next steps, we're currently in the draft application evaluation phase. This will be followed by another round of consultations with applicants to share scores or preliminary scores and provide feedback. And then final applications are due on June 6th, with award recommendations anticipated to be released in July and final board approval in August. So with that, concludes my presentation.
Well, thank you very much for your presentation. This is a information item and would entertain discussion on the item if there's any comments. Are there any public comments on the item?
There's no public comment.
I would just like to say that for Yolo County, we had We talked about it a lot. We've had it at our YTD meetings. It came to city council. It went back to YTD. It's just been a really collaborative process and I just really appreciate it. Thank you. Moving on to item number.
I would just
oh,
comment,
yeah,
Madam Chair.
sorry.
On behalf of not my jurisdiction, where I think we've got a pretty robust staff, but on the behalf of smaller jurisdictions, I think that's a really big deal, how we handle this and assist people through the process. Because my year, last year as MLC president really highlighted the fact that, you know, vast majority of cities are tiny and don't have staffs do much. And so most of our processes that we have from the federal government and the state government are aimed at bigger cities, not the littles, and the littles just get sort of run over and left behind. So I appreciate all of our efforts to sort of level the playing field there a little bit.
So very much for your additive comments.
Madam Chair?
Yes,
Thank you.
Chair recognizes Director Chapman.
Thanks. And thank you for the presentation. One quick question. So on the timeline, I didn't see, does this come back to the Transportation Committee before the approval in August? I didn't see that on the timeline.
Yeah, it will.
And that comes back to us in August and then go to the board in August.
Correct.
Okay. And then just a quick question. I know where it's a 10-minute item. I'm curious to know in the beginning, you talk about desire for partnership, a collaborative application process. You strongly encouraged applicants to coordinate in this. Can you talk a little bit about in the 4 counties that are applying, how that's going, what you're seeing kind of in the early application phases around collaboration within counties?
Yeah, so for Sacramento County, they've coordinated around an MOU. And as far as I know, that's been going great. There have been some jurisdictions that have ultimately withheld from applying, and they've sorted that out on their own. YOLO was taking a similar process, though things have changed recently. And then for Sutter and Yuba, they've maybe taken a slightly less formal process, but still discussed amongst themselves what projects to prioritize and apply for, and have come with a planned approach.
Okay, and I appreciate that. And when you're looking through these, when these applications are submitted, how much weight are you giving towards projects that are submitted under a kind of a collaborative approach within the counties? Is that a significant factor when you're looking at these projects?
No.
Okay.
They're being reviewed individually.
Okay. And then are there other counties besides, you mentioned Sacramento, so Yuba and Sutter have an MOU or they do not?
I don't believe they have a formal MOU at this time.
They don't. Okay. Yeah, and we have somewhat of an MOU, as you mentioned, Yolo County, and working closely with our city managers and with YTD and jurisdictions to try and gather around an MOU and know that that's an important piece, especially when you're looking at, I think Yolo's amount is just not over $5 million, right? And in order to get things done, or to get the funding and be able to bank it to the following year is extremely important, as Director Sanders said, to some of these smaller jurisdictions that need those dollars to be able to roll over and accumulate and then do a much larger project. So I encourage any counties who are going through this to approach it from a collaborative nature, and look at these projects that we can have within our county to be able to move these projects forward together. That's kind of the point of what we've been talking about over the past few months here. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Chapman.
Sure, Lauren, can I?
Yes.
I want to add on, well, first of all, thank you for recognizing David and giving him the SACOG chair's welcome. David is our manager of grants, and so you should be really nice to him.
Yeah.
That's the secret here. But in all seriousness, we've never, as you know, we've never done as much engagement with all of our board and the 6 members on the working group from the board, right, that revamped our entire state and federal funding round. Never done as much engagement with all of the staff at all the agencies to really, over the last 2 years. That's never happened in my time here. So Director Sander, I'm sort of like echoing your comments. That said, I think there's still, this is very different. We've never done it this way. And so there's still quite a bit of an education process and a learning curve. And what we say to our partner jurisdictions is, we are here to help you, right? This is not a black box. Please do not throw an application and hope that it has to meet a minimum scoring threshold. And the way to make sure that, you get the best chance possible is to talk to the staff. That's why you see multiple rounds of consultation, right? And it's going to keep going until we get the final applications in. So I just want to make sure everybody's, heard that. I think we have, but this is not just here's the money and do whatever you want. You still have to submit applications. And in our 2 counties, right, there's been an interesting approach, which has been hands off from us, but to develop these MOUs to give everybody sort of a minimum allocation. But you still have to come in, you have to score, hit a minimum threshold based on the criteria that you all helped establish and approve. So.
Thank you, Director
Real
Branstad.
quick, David, further to your status and the scope of your discretion, when's your birthday?
Now we're getting into.
All right.
And unfortunately, I've got to add one more thing.
Okay.
NLC ran a program specifically aimed at helping small jurisdictions do applications to federal DOT that they've never really been able to do before, right? Jurisdictions couldn't afford it. And it was in conjunction with some big foundations. And unfortunately, that program's coming to an end. But the one real important conclusion out of it was you could get 2 conclusions. You could get these jurisdictions to compete with the big cities if you just gave them support up front. Second part was, turns out they couldn't really execute those contracts without additional help. So they didn't really have expertise to apply, and they really didn't have expertise to execute because the process is just too hard. So NLC is now petitioning the federal government saying, do you understand what you're doing? You're setting a bar up here and you're excluding 90% of cities from being able to apply. It's not really fair in any context, but from our point of view now, you also have to wonder, now that we've helped them apply, do we also have to help them execute so they don't get in trouble on reports and all the other requirements?
Thank you very much, Director Sander. And thank you so much for your presentation today, David. Welcome. All right, we're going to move to item number 8, the Federal Fiscal Year 2024 Project Delivery Report with Mr. Michael Mendoza.
Good morning, Miguel again, giving our yearly update on project delivery and a good refresher as to the project delivery and programming activities as well. I want to start by defining delivery at this stage, right? Delivery for us in this very context means getting federal approval to start spending money. So these are the projects and money that was awarded by SACOG in funding rounds. And even more specifically, these are federal dollars. So great that David just had the presentation. This delivery aspect does not include that. Those are dollars that are administered by Caltrans in the state. So we are sort of out of that process after we program and decide which projects get funding. So this is the other revenue that is used during the funding rounds. In order to assist project sponsors in delivering or getting approval to start spending their money, we do follow a delivery process that we get approved, or at least we come for the committee and board for their consideration and approval. Because this process really is the foundation of how delivery and program activities are done, I want to go over it. The process really starts with programming. So after the board awards dollars to projects, the programming and project delivery team comes in and coordinates closely with jurisdictions to say, hey, you've received some money, congratulations, this is really good. What year would you need these funds? Because not every project is ready on day one. And then also what phase or scope are you using this money for? Important to note that SACOG, and it's federally required, runs a 4-year program for these funds. So we have about 4 years to kind of figure out where projects need to go. And there's also a apportionment limit every year. So the region receives an apportionment is what they would call it. And our goal is to, one, program against those dollars up to that limit as close as we can, while considering timing of projects and other needs. Once that's done, after we worked with the jurisdictions, figuring out where you need to go, these projects are then placed on priority tiers, and that is incumbent on really the year that we're in. So tier 1 being your project that's programmed in the current year. You've told us you were going to use the money this year, so you have priority for 4 months, so for a third of the year. And priority really means you can come in and 100% these funds will be available for you and you only. After the first 4 months, we start inviting tier 2 projects to come in. So tier 2 projects are projects programmed in the future years. So the next 3 years of a 4-year program. And essentially what we say is, hey, we may have some money that are not going to be used. Maybe something changed with the project or there might be a delay. Are you interested in moving forward? Can you do your project now? And oftentimes we're taking up on that request. And really this is all so that we can effectively use our funding and not leave anything on the table for the year, and make sure that projects are ready to go. And so during that tier 2 phase, right after the first 4 months, tier 1 and tier 2 projects, they can go at it and see who can get to the money first. It is a first come, first serve system. And tier 3 is, as long as I've been here, we haven't utilized. These are projects that may have cost overruns or need a little bit more money and say, hey, do you have money left? We'd like to maybe borrow some and we'll pay you back in local dollars. And again, we usually don't get to that point, but those are available after the first 8 months of the year. And so I've sort of been hinting here, right, is the last handful of years, our partner agencies and sponsor agencies are very good at making sure that their projects will move forward. So we usually use up our apportionments pretty early in the year, typically within the first 6 to 7 months. So what happens when we've assigned all that money to projects, but there are still projects that want to move forward? We have 4 options for that, and I'm going to go through it in terms of what we would really like to avoid to our most used tool. The first one is asking a project or project sponsor to stop and wait. We don't want to do that. If you're ready to build something now or start a phase, we want to make sure you can do it. So the stop and wait approach, while an option, is one we don't usually take. The second is there's an option for us to ask an agency if they have the capability to move ahead with local dollars. And then when federal dollars are made available, those are then converted or they're reimbursed for their costs. Understandably, not every jurisdiction can front a lot of local money to do these projects. And then third is if you have a request and we only have a portion of it available, we ask you to, we would ask a sponsor to say, hey, can you move ahead with the partial funding, cover the rest in local, and then once funding is available, we'll convert that to federal dollars. And then the last, and a tool we use the most is loans. We, at this point, right, when we know we're about to run out of money and we coordinate very closely with the jurisdictions to know what's going to come forward, we start calling other regions and we say, hey, do you have money you're not going to use? Can we borrow them at 0 interest and we'll pay you back dollar for dollar in the future year? And we've been very successful at that. And we leverage a lot of the relationships we have. And just in case you're wondering, what would be the motivation for another region to loan us money? Usually it's 2 things. One, there's a lot of good people out there, and I think they like to see, they like to help others. But 2, there is an AB, we call it AB 1012, a rule in California that if you have federal dollars that are flowing through an MPO and it sits there for 3 years, the California Transportation Commission can repurpose that money for something else. So regions are very interested to make sure their funding is used every year. And when we pay them back, it sort of resets that timeline for them. So other regions like to save, maybe do a really big project, and this is a way for them to keep their money fresh. So with that in mind, how did we do? We did 38 projects. A full list of that is in your packets as attachment B to the staff report. 19 of them pre-construction phases and 19 construction phases. And those roll up to about $77 million last year that we were able to help folks deliver. And again, all credit to the agencies that are doing these projects. We're just making sure they have the money that they need to do their work. And of that 77 million, 36, almost 37 of that was from loans that we took from other regions. A list of those loans are in your packet as well as attachment C to the staff report. And so to rephrase that, this is $36 million or 37 that might have otherwise had to wait or use local money. And again, we don't like to do that. We want to make sure that if you're ready to go, we've got the money for you. And so that information is in your packet. What we do is essentially we take these loans because it's 0 interest and relatively low risk. We do them relatively quickly when the need comes up, and then we come back to the committee and board and update you on what we did. So just to highlight 3 projects, and there is a purpose to why these 3. The first one being Franklin Boulevard, Complete Streets Phase 1 and 2. And this is a great project, reduces the project boundaries from 4 lanes to 2, and then does a lot of complete streets. And my favorite part of it is a Class 4 protected bike lane. Great project, was able to secure federal approval to start spending for construction. The second, Jack Creek Greenway Up Trail Phase 1. This is in the city of Roseville. And in the presentation here, it's the green section is what we were able to get federal approval for to start spending in the construction phase. And then last but not least is El Dorado Trail, Missouri Flat Road Phase 2 overcrossing, another great project, and the scope is there. And I wanted to highlight particularly the last two because I would be remiss to not mention that we also work very closely with the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency and El Dorado County Transportation Commission, since they have awards as well in our program that use the same funding. So we want to make sure that the awards that were made by those two bodies, when they're ready to come in, we're here and we're saying, we have the funds for you. Whether we have to do that through a loan or we do that through our regular programming and delivery process, we want to make sure that the promises we made are promises that we can keep. So again, a very quick refresher of sort of the delivery items that we do, particularly just for the funding that SACOG has a lot of decision-making that we can do in order to deliver these projects. So gonna close out with just the next steps and what the delivery and programming team will come to you for the rest of the year and next year. We're gonna continue to assist folks this year. We are in the middle of making sure that funding gets their approval to spend. Later this calendar year, we'll come back and ask your consideration again for the process. And again, the full process is in your packets as attachment A to the staff report. And then about this time next year, you'll see me again. I'll pop up and say, hey, this is how we did. Here's the numbers. Here's here's some projects. Just to keep you abreast of any loans, projects, or activities that we've taken. So with that, happy to answer any questions or take any comments.
Thank you so very much for your presentation. Do my colleagues have any questions for Mr. Mendoza? I'm not seeing any. Do we have any public comment on the item?
There's no public comment.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Miguel. I really appreciate it. We're going to move on to transportation options for the upcoming A's games. And this will be presented by Nicole Zeeling. Oh, I said it wrong. I know I did. Go ahead. Say it right for me.
Sorry, what was that?
The last name, I think I pronounced it
Oh,
wrong.
Nicole Zeeling Porter.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm Nicole Zeeling Porter. I'm on the transportation team, our sustainable mobility group here at SACOG, and I am here today to give you an update on a topic that we touched on during the March Transportation Committee meeting. Okay, so you've all probably heard by now that the A's are now playing at Sutter Health Park, just across the river from us, and this Major League Baseball team will be in our area for the next 3 years. And this includes 81 home games just for this first season. And so as a quick refresher, you might be wondering, why are we talking about baseball at a transportation agency meeting? Well, we here at SACOG see this as an opportunity, not just for sports fans who really like baseball, but also for our region. We ultimately want to help shape how visitors can explore our cities using sustainable modes and give them such a positive experience that they'll be encouraged to return to our region again and again. And now we know that Sutter Health Park has a maximum capacity of 14,000 people. So for those of you that maybe never went to the Oakland Coliseum, myself included, it's a pretty significant difference. Their old stadium could carry about 57,000 people. So what this means for us is that there's a higher chance that we're going to have a lot more sold out games, which means a lot more game day visitors. And what we'd like to avoid is negatively impacting our nearby communities and leaving visitors with frustrating memories of traffic jams or long delays. Luckily, we don't have to do this alone. A core function of our sustainable mobility team here is partnering with both public and private organizations to help address transportation challenges from new, different angles. So over the past few months, our team has been coordinating with partners at local transit agencies, our cities, and the economic development and business communities. We wanted to make sure that we could share our agency's goals, so really making travel in and around our region easier, and make sure that we align all of our communication efforts with all of our partners. Because if you were to ask SEPTA, who just hosted the Super Bowl parade this past year, or LA Metro, who's planning for the 2028 Olympics, there's nothing worse than providing conflicting or confusing information to large crowds that are going to a single event. So what we've been able to do on our own is leverage our recently launched NorCal Go platform and app to build a custom page that's dedicated to sharing every way that folks can get to and from Sutter Health Park without their car. So if you were to visit norcalgo.org/Sutter Health Park, you would see that we've amplified all of the different sustainable modes. So for folks that maybe want to save time and that $20, $30 parking fees, that way they can pay for a hot dog and maybe a lemonade at the game. We're really amplifying YOLO TD's bus service. They've added a sweeper bus for late night games that can get people home around 10 or 11 p.m., as well as SAC-RT's bus and light rail service, and the safest, not just the routes that will show up on Google Maps, but our recommendations for the safest walking, biking, and scootering routes across Tower Bridge and also to and from Sacramento Valley Station. And we've also provided step-by-step instructions for how folks can use our NorCal Go platform to find carpools for specific games or matches that they're going to. So what did we see on opening day on March 31st? Sutter Health Park had a sold out crowd of more than 12,000 fans. And just over that first 3 games that weekend, they saw 31,000 fans turn out. YOLO TD and SAC-RT made sure that they had their transit staff out on both sides of the river. And that really helps, especially new transit riders, find their way to the stadium, make sure they got on the right buses. And this not only demonstrates a really strong partnership between the two agencies, but it also created a very seamless experience and connection for riders. Both agencies continue to share information on their socials. We heard from the stadium's bike valet that they had about 80 bikes there on that first opening game day, but they're confident that they can carry a lot more bikes there. And that bike valet is provided by Sutter Health Park. Plenty of e-scooters have been at the ready on both sides of the river and at the stadium. So I think for us, our overall takeaway right now is that there's room to grow, right? There are a lot more sustainable trips that could be made. So what's next for us? We've made it through the first month and a half, but there are still 55 home games left in the season. So our team is committed to promoting information about all these different ways folks can get to the game and continuing to partner specifically with our economic development and business community. We've had conversations with Capital Corridor, for example. Right now, for evening games on the weekends specifically, they only offer a train from the Bay Area to here in Sacramento, but there is not a late enough train that runs to get people back to the Bay Area. So you could take the train here, but you would need to spend the night or maybe find a carpool going back. And right now, they don't see it as feasible for them to add this late night train. But if we were able to partner with one of the sports teams or maybe Greater Sacramento Economic Council and get the ticket information to Capital Corridor, if they can see, for instance, the zip codes of the credit cards that were used to purchase these game tickets, they can use that data to help them project future ridership and determine if that late night train service is something that would work for them. We're also committed to figuring out additional partnership opportunities with the A's and River Cats. I'm happy to share that on June 3rd, both SACOG's team and YOLO TD will be able to table at an A's game over at the stadium. And we're having our fingers crossed to do a social media video with Dinger and Stomper. And of course, it wouldn't be SACOG if we didn't have maps and data involved as well. So our team will be monitoring our shared micromobility data dashboard, which if you look on the right there at those maps, we can see on a daily basis, the number of trips, the routes that people take, and the amount of time somebody spends riding an e-scooter here if they're renting it from Lime or Bird or Spin. And that can help us understand, right, like how folks are getting to and from the stadium. So we know that on opening day, 121 e-scooter trips were taken to or near the park. And since then, there have been more than 3,000 scooter trips taken to that destination. And so with that, I'll answer any questions that you might have.
Nicole, thank you so much.
Comment. I've been following attendance at the A's games. And their last season in Oakland, they averaged 10,800 per game. And they're doing about that right now here. Of course, what's the capacity? 14,000.
Mm-hmm.
The Yankees drew 12,000 something. It looks like they're right about the same average, which is encouraging.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Chair recognizes Director Guerrero.
Thank you. Just to add that sometimes the number is not reflecting the tickets that were given away. It doesn't take into account those that come in. So the capacity, when they actually, that you have to take a look at what the actual quote is. It could say it was sold out. And that is the 14,000 number. So I just wanted to make sure that you might want to contact somebody to get the actual data instead of trying to read through some numbers, because those that are not counted are tickets given away to family members, like Mother's Day. There was a lot of parents there. And tickets given away to organizations that requested free tickets. So those aren't counted. And yes, it was, I'm seeing an increase in especially the A's, the Angels coming in and other teams coming in. Yankees was what we expected. I will say that I would like to see more, like the scooter and bikes used. I feel that number 3,000 is kind of low. Wishing it was maybe double that at this point for the total number in the games. Seeing in what we can do, I do know Saba's doing a great job in trying to do social media, cute little pictures that they have a baseball player riding on a bicycle. Trying to make it cool and fun for maybe certain crowds who aren't sure. If we can do more work in collaborating in Westway for the routes on the Sacramento side so that we can build that partnership. And I don't know if the number is low because that meets the capacity for what's available. And if we need to do more for that, I'm just not sure why the number is kind of low. If we can, the other thing that I've noticed, and if you can get that data, is that after the Mother's Day game, I bought a ticket. I'm a season ticket holder. There were a lot of season tickets sold, so I don't get surveys. But from the ticket, I actually sold my game that day and then changed my mind and ran into and watched the Yankees for a little bit. I did get a survey when I purchased through StubHub. And in that survey, it does ask a question, what mode of transportation did you get in? And asks a lot of questions for data that might be really helpful for you to get. I don't know who's collecting that. I think it is the A's.
Yeah.
So if you can get some kind, a little more data to help you navigate through this process. Another organization that has expressed interest, but they will require some sort of payment via is our on-demand rideshare. They have expressed interest in participating in more activity, except we are limiting and not advertising via because we want to make sure they can accommodate, what we have capacity for in West Sacramento for the regular, rides that we have going on. And they're interested in expanding over to Sacramento as well, except they would just they have an additional cost and it's not cheap. There is also, it's called, they're coaches. They're willing to transport. And I know that the A's have been interested in bringing in people from Vegas. They're still focused on that, growth. So if they're interested in doing that, having that conversation, if there's like a reservation to do some work on adding more people and their focus, their marketing is towards Vegas, then taking a look at, what they're like, how are they going to pay for people to come from Vegas and back? Okay. So I don't know if they're interested even, we talked about opening up that additional line. They do know how to do that, back and forth from the Bay Area. I don't know. I got to go back and find out. I'm going to check in with them. Like, did they not decide to do that because they're focusing on Vegas ever since that conversation patch came out? Their focus is attracting more people from Vegas and improving, growing that fan base. I don't know what, how that marketing is interacting with public transportation and growth and where they want to expand. So there might be something there if you need help with, any conversations.
Right.
I'll invite your team to a suite and we'll all sit in and have a meeting there. I'm open to ways to open up that dialogue and to improve, public transportation. So let me know, we have a suite there. We can bring in people that are there and have a meeting there on site. Okay.
That would be great. A lot of new leads, especially that survey data I'm really interested in. So we'll see who's hosting that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the granularity of your knowledge. Thanks. Yeah, big fan.
Granularity.
First, the chair recognizes Director Chapman.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Nicole. Just quickly, I sit on the CCJPA board. Director Habushel is the chair this year, so please feel free to reach out. We did increase services around larger events at Levi Stadium that were extremely successful, around Niners games, around concerts when they were in town, Taylor Swift, Beyonce, and added not just an extra train to that, but increased service routes. So I don't know how it works with 55 games, right, in a season. Like, it's a lot of back as opposed to just one game on a weekend. But anything that you need, please reach out to myself and to Chair Hobushel, and we can chat and bring that to Rob Paget and his team down there.
Great,
Thanks.
thank you.
Director Blugarden.
Thanks. Thank you. Attended opening night and was very happy to note that in and out of the ballpark was easy, parking was easy. I'm a Giant season ticket holder and it was infinitely a lot easier to travel
Wow.
to West Sacramento than it was to San Francisco. I'm wondering, you speak about outreach, is there any thought about outreach to the Yuba Sutter region? I mean, there's a lot of baseball fans up there, and I don't want to take away from our high wheelers, my friends in the back here from there. I know. I'm just wondering, has there been any discussion with Yuba Sutter Transit or anybody else about bringing folks in from Yuba Sutter?
Yeah, we actually haven't had initial discussions with Yuba Sutter Transit on this topic yet, but would be happy to reach out to Adam and Matt and see if we can share and cross promote some information.
It may be, again, with 55 games, I doubt you want to do something 55 times, but periodically there might be
Right.
the option to do that. But
Yeah, thank you.
thanks.
If there are no other comments, I just want to say thank you for bringing this item forward. It's it's one of the most prideful items of the region right now, so thank you. All right.
Thank you.
Chair Lauren, we do
Yeah.
have a written comment on this item. Would you like me to read
Oh,
that
yes,
now?
please.
Okay, thank you. This is from Dan Allison, a citizen. He says the staff report for the Transportation Committee, Agenda Item 9, Transportation Options for Upcoming A's Games, doesn't indicate that the A's are contributing to transit options to the games. It seems to me that they should be providing funding to YOLO Bus or including YOLO Bus passes as part of their tickets. And that concludes his comment.
Thank you. Are there any comments to be made on that item? That question? No. Okay.
And I would just add, if they can take the game from the Dodgers today, and that would mean 2 out of 3 from the Dodgers in this series, that would do a lot to boost attendance, I think.
Okay, we'll let them know. Yeah.
Maybe invite Director Desmond to the booth also. All right.
Chair Lauren,
yes.
you probably heard me say this before, and Director Guerrero, you may have been in this meeting, but when the MLB commissioner came here for a visit very recently, right, he walked out and the quote in the B was, "I thought this was a city of 500,000. Now I realize it's a mega region of 11 million plus." But that is, we really should understand that what we're trying to do here, right, is to take advantage of the Northern California mega region, as well as figure out how to give an experience to people and get first-time folks, right, on transit, on Capitol Corridor, on scooters and bikes. So anyway, it's, very prideful.
Thank you. Very exciting stuff. We're going to move on to our report on Cap to Cap, the Cap to Cap trip and the SACOG tour. And I just want to say personally, I was so happy to be on the tour and bring back ideas about housing, transportation, so many things. Go ahead. I just went blank on the type of usage. I'm so sorry. It was astounding to see stuff like a market on the bottom and housing on top, that mixed use.
Mixed use.
It was really inspiring.
How about a
Thank
mixed
you.
use fire station? That's
love
what
the
gets
fire
everybody's
stations.
attention. So,
Yeah.
and I would certainly invite all of you who actually attended the tour just to reflect on this. Obviously, we haven't done this in a number of years, but May 2nd, right before Cap to Cap, we took not just the board and board members and alternates, but actually other elected officials around the region, 30 plus people. I want to give a huge shout out to Mia Lopez, Gabby Herrera, Rosie Ramos, Christina Lockie, who all made this possible. If you can we did a few slides for those of you who were there to help with your collective recall. just in case the Edgar bar kind of clouds your memory. So next slide. Inside joke. Okay. Potomac Yards. So one of the, so Northern Virginia, essentially Alexandria, the historic city of Alexandria, and then the county of Arlington actually make up the old original diamond that was carved out from Virginia and Maryland. The Alexandria, Arlington ceded back to the state of Virginia in the 1800s. But those two communities now, basically suburbs of DC. Potomac Yards is an old rail yards. I don't remember exactly how much the acreage is as compared to the Sacramento rail yards, but it is an old rail yards that is has taken decades, but is now really beginning to accelerate redevelopment. On the left, I just made reference to this. This is one of our, this is the always a highlight of the tour. This is a fire station in Alexandria with affordable housing above it. And they've cut a whole deal with the fire department not to have all the alarms and sirens go until they get, I guess, a mile away. But, and this is completely blended in with a lot of the other development there. Again, Alexandria Potomac Yards, great example, still in process of really rebuilding on top of an old rail yards, their Potomac Yards. Next slide. So Columbia Pike, we talk a lot about commercial corridors in this region. Director Sander knows this all too well, but there's a lot of great examples in the DC region and Northern Virginia, one of which is Columbia Pike. Columbia Pike, very old commercial corridor, has a lot of different commercial single-story uses and is beginning to accelerate in terms of its redevelopment. Of the many things we learned here is form-based code. So they took out the specific zoning and basically went to height and mass and allowed any kind of uses within that form-based code. They were actually going to have a streetcar down this corridor, and that funding fell through. But the planning that they did in advance of the streetcar, the land use is actually happening already. In the middle picture here, we see a small but really important example in urban design of a cut through from a neighborhood of townhomes and single family homes. This is basically a cut through from that neighborhood through to Columbia Pike in a commercial area, which includes grocery stores, restaurants, retail. So rather than having a wall behind the grocery store and being walled off, there's an intentional cut through. On the right-hand side there, this is also an affordable housing development that we saw in Columbia Pike that got a lot of people's attention. Some of this is permanently supportive housing, very high density and very much facilitated by a local nonprofit there that did a lot of the fundraising that helped a lot of those programs on the program side succeed. Next slide. I think this is it. And then Falls Church. So small incorporated city that was sort of hemmed in on all sides, had no room to grow, but is growing up and doing a lot of infill development. And we had a great team there of the mayor and the staff and council members all talk about the importance of their business district and commercial revitalization, and in a very historic town where they are going up because they can't go out, but still trying to preserve that neighborhood character and quality of life. I think that's the end of the slides. Yes, it is. So any reflections from our board members? Much appreciated. Floor is
Yeah, I
yours.
jumped the gun on that. Director Bungard.
So first, thanks to staff for the opportunity to participate in the tour. It was my first time going on a tour like that. The fire station with the housing above certainly piqued my interest as an ex-fire chief, and in a community that is in the process of trying to figure out how to redo an old fire station. Matter of fact, Maya Contreras and I have been swapping emails. So she's given me some staff reports, et cetera, about the mixed use. So who knows? We'll see. But that seed was planted based upon this tour. So thank you. The form-based code, that seemed like that was really interesting to me as well. And its applicability in our region, or at least in our city. It's one of those things where when you come back from a tour or a conference, I'm sure staff cringes because there's a bazillion questions being asked, but this is the type of stuff that I think spurs good change. And especially just, it seemed like there was an abundance of grocery stores with commercial above. It's an interesting concept. I know Director Bradford was certainly interested in that because I think they've got some grocery stores coming in the Yuba County area. But the bottom line for me was very eye-opening, certainly worth the time and the effort, and look forward to potentially doing it again. But thank you.
Thank you. I just echo your comments. Director Chapman.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you to Mia and her team. I think when I stayed for the SACOG, I'm sorry, for Cap to Cap after, and I think I was caught saying that I thought that this trip was more beneficial than some of the rest of the work that we did at Cap to Cap. It's all important, but I went on the Denver trip and learned a ton from that, and I was excited to go on this one. James did a great job of recapping it. One thing you don't see is the amount of sweat that all of us have on us because it was unbelievably warm and humid that day. But we had the air-conditioned bus that could get us out of the heat. But I think part of it for me was, we went through, there's a picture on there of in Falls Church, right? And it's like this focus on strategic high-density housing, right? And where it's placed and how you do placemaking around it, so that you have these walkable neighborhoods where you don't need to rely on transportation to get the things that you need. And we recently in Davis adopted our downtown plan, which we use form-based code, which we have there in our plans. It was great to see some of this come to action on Columbia Pike. I lived on Columbia Pike 24 years ago, and it was great to be there and see the change that has happened on that stretch through there. Transportation-wise, there was a lot of talk about bus rapid transit, right, and what that looks like, dedicated lanes for it and the work they're doing there. I would love to have Stuart come here. He was a burst of energy, so knowledgeable. Stuart Schwartz, who was kind of our tour guide throughout the day, did an amazing job and we had a ton of knowledge, and it would be applicable to this region as well. It's not just specific to that, right? He works on a kind of smart growth nonprofit. So again, one thing he said at the very end, planning, right, around transportation is grids, not cul-de-sacs. He kept saying, if I can leave you with anything, do grids. Don't do cul-de-sacs or dead end streets for modes of transportation. And lastly, I think the stuff on Columbia Pike, is James, you mentioned, is kind of the pre-planning that agencies are doing around infrastructure to kind of help promote development, right? And take away some of those barriers to developments happening. So again, thank you and your team. Thank Mia for putting this together. It was great.
Thank you so much for your comments. Do we have other comments about either trip? Cap to Cap? I didn't get to, I'm gonna go next year. All right. Thank you so much. Thanks for inviting us and having us go. I learned a lot. Moving on to receive and file, there's some items.
Chair Lauren, we do have a public comment on
Okay.
receive and file item number 11. Would you like me to read
I
that
would
into the
love to.
record? Thank you. This is from Dan Allison, in his role with Sacramento Transit Advocates and Writers. He says that item number 11, transit financial planning efforts, scope coordination and timeline. The attachment mentions possible future funding opportunities, including other scenarios will be developed in close coordination with each transit operator and will include potential new revenue streams such as sales, property, and/or payroll taxes. STAR wishes to make sure that property tax and payroll tax are included. Though there are challenges for each of these options, perhaps greater than for sales tax, it is important that they be included and analyzed. A significant number of transit advocates and transit writers have questioned the idea of higher sales taxes because they are regressive. And that concludes his comment.
Thank you so very much. Any other comments or questions? Item 11 or item 12? All right, thank you so much. Are there any other matters that we need to address today?
Yeah, I just want to put a plug in, a reminder that after the board meeting or during the board meeting, we're going to have a workshop on microtransit. We're going to be having Susan Shaheen come. Susan Shaheen is with UC Berkeley. She's a professor there and has dedicated, I think, a lot of her career and work in microtransit specifically and shared mobility. And so she's going to come and kind of talk about some of the work that they're doing and some lessons learned that might be able to be applied here in our region as we start to look at micromobility more as an option in microtransit specifically. So look forward to having her come, and we'll see
I'm
you then.
excited about microtransit, excited. And also excited about the Thursday, June 5th next meeting of Transportation Committee. With that, this meeting is adjourned and I think it's 11:44. Oh,
Nice.
nope. Taking it back, reverse the tape. This meeting is not adjourned.
They're not, because the lunch
Oh,
that you're all
okay.
welcome to stay for actually is a continuation of the Transportation Committee. So if you want, please stay for lunch if you'd
Oopsies.
like. It's the STIP,
Oopsies.
the funding round. So you can be in recess until noon.
Okay, recess until noon. Thank you. Thank you for that. All right. Bye.
Okay, we're live now, so you can just use your mic right there.
All right, thank you so much. We're gonna begin our presentation for lunch. Thank you so much.
Hi, good morning or good afternoon. I don't know what time it is. Thank you all for coming and joining today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our regional funding strategy. I know that we've heard a lot about the funding rounds in the last, I don't know, few years, but we're going to kind of put it together and just give a higher level context, especially for those who may not have been there through that process or just would like a refresher on the general understanding of our funding programs. So we run a number of competitive programs here at SACOG, including our regional funding program, which we're going to talk about in more detail today. But we also have things like our carbon reduction program, transit discretionary programs, our regional active transportation program, and the SB 125 transit program. So these are all competitive programs funded through either state or federal dollars that we oversee and manage and provide grant funding for. So a little bit more on what sources fund these programs. So like I said, there's both federal and state dollars that go into this. Depending on the program, it's either one or a mix of others. On the federal side, the major funding sources that go into our regional funding program in particular are Congestion Management Air Quality, or CMAQ, and Surface Transportation Block Group Program, STBG, also known as Regional Surface Transportation Program. On the federal transit side, we have some specific sections, 5307 and 5339, which have to do with both operating and capital dollars. And then we also get some funding through some emerging new programs that might come out of bills passed in DC. Carbon reduction program is a very good example of that came out of the IIJA, or Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. On the state side, which you heard a little bit about today, State Transportation Improvement Program dollars. There's also funding that comes through things like Senate Bill 1 or Senate Bill 125, and then a bunch of other kind of random state funding programs feed into things like our active transportation program. It's really important here, though, as we look at these dollars, to underscore that the funding doesn't necessarily come directly to SACOG from the federal government. The funds are actually allocated directly to Caltrans, and Caltrans sub-allocates the dollars to us. So states are the recipients of the funding, and then they flow those dollars down to the MPOs. So just in terms of how the money goes out the door, there's kind of a process there. It is not just directly coming to SACOG. So today, talk a little bit about this regional funding program that we administer. This is both the state funding program, which if you were here for Transportation Committee, you got an update on where that is, as well as our federal funding program. We went through a 2-year plus long process to take a new look at how we administer these programs. And so under the federal program, we will be administering programs aligned with the funding sources specifically, the CMAQ and the STBG funding. And then there's some priority programs that you can see off to the side in that brownish yellow box, which is funded by both of those depending on what the program is. And then of course we have our state funding program, which is the 4-county only, which is funded specifically from the STIP dollars for the state. So as we went through that 2-year process, we worked with partner staff, we worked with board members to rethink our regional program. One of the key tenets of the new program was knowing that we only can fund about 5% of the regional projects that are actually identified in the MTP. How do we balance the really great needs that our region has with our regional and state policies? So we were sort of tasked with the understanding of how can we provide funding certainty and flexibility, clear expectations for programs, and addressing critical things like maintenance needs, which we heard over and over as like one of the top issues that we needed to be looking at, with things like achieving our greenhouse gas targets that we have to meet those, and aligning with more broadly our MTP and strategic plan policies as well. So this was a big part of the conversation that led to how our regional funding program is developed and the framework was established during that process. So I'm going to first start with talking a little bit about the state funding, the 4-county STIP program. I won't go into super depth because you've heard a lot about it recently, but definitely an overview. I want to just put in a reminder that through both the state and the federal programs, the state funding itself represents less than 20% of the dollars that we put out through our regional funding program. So it is a small part of this. Doesn't mean it's less important, but from a dollar perspective, it's a much smaller program than what we'll be doing earlier next year with the federal program. So as a reminder, the State Transportation Improvement Program, or the 4-county state funding program, is applicable to Sacramento, Sutter, Yolo, and Yuba counties. This is just because that is how kind of the state designates funding. We are in our TPA for the state, and so we are sought with overseeing the state dollars that go to the 4 counties within the RTPA. This program is broken out into 2 parts. We have the intra-county program, which is focused on fix-it-first projects, as well as those that might provide some additional improvements. That is a county-by-county program where folks are submitting projects to be reviewed and scored against a threshold, but they're not competing against each other across the counties. They're only competing within each of the counties. The regional set-aside is a holistic, competitive process across all 4 counties. And this is meant to support a larger or regionally significant project that the board has already defined as important through the prioritization process that we went through in October. And the exception there is Yuba and Sutter counties, who did not have a project on that list because at the time that that went through, they did not have a project that they were seeking funds for. We did allow them to submit a project for consideration, even though they were not on the list. They have to meet the same criteria as the other projects, though. So a little bit about the objectives of this. So again, we've talked a lot about Fix It First. It was really important for us to provide funding consistent with the needs that we heard through that 2-year process. STIP funding is really geared to align with both what our region is seeing, but also with CAPTI, which is a Fix It First initiative. So looking at things like state of good repair, climate and equity, how those all kind of come together. Also, obviously, needing to support our MTP, SCS. But the big thing here with the way that we did this program is really related to providing funding consistency and knowing how much money is going to be available. Prior to this new structure, SACOG combined state funding with federal funding in one really large regional funding program, and we made the decisions on the back end after projects were awarded what would be matched with STIP funds. Because through the corrective action that we could no longer really pool the state funds with the federal funds, it wouldn't be there wouldn't be a clean way to do it. We did break this out into its own unique program. What this allowed us to do was provide funding to each of the counties for project submittals that is consistent with what the state or the California Transportation Commission calculates as being available with that funding source for each of the 4 counties. So they know how much money is available to them, and it's sort of up to them to figure out how to coordinate and come up with project submittals that meet the amount that's available there. And as I mentioned, it also helps us kind of leverage that board adopted prioritization process that we've now gone through twice, and really elevate those projects that we've come around together as a region to support. So on the federal side, this is one that also got some significant revisions. We typically pooled all of our funding sources together. One of the things that we decided to do when we created the new 6-county federal program, so just a reminder, this is the 4 counties plus Placer and El Dorado, are now competing for this funding. We decided to align our programs with the funding sources themselves. What this did was provide a lot more clarity on what the expectations were for each of the programs, since the requirements of CMAQ, for example, are quite different from those of STBG. STBG is one of the most flexible funding sources that there is. CMAQ is quite a bit more restricted comparatively. And so rather than lumping those all together and again, sort of making the choices at the SACOG level, letting folks select which program would best fit their project and having clear guidance and clear expectations for each of those to help folks kind of guide them into how they should be applying for funding for their projects. It also helped us focus on our goals as a region. Which goals match with which program to make it sure that we were kind of comparing apples to apples when we were looking at project submittals. So something that focused on air quality is going to be compared to another project that focuses on air quality rather than maybe something that is a pretty clear maintenance project. Those are really kind of hard to compare against one another. So in addition to that kind of clarity and the flexibility for larger projects, what this also did was allow us to focus in more on maintenance and safety. During that 2-year process, we really heard a lot about how much maintenance is needed in the funding round that we didn't really address in a clear way in prior rounds. In prior programs, we sort of had yes, you can do maintenance, but you also have to do X, Y, and Z on top of that. And because as we were going through the MTP update or the blueprint process, we continually heard there and have top dollar amount dedicated towards maintenance specific projects. We really needed a funding round that reflected that same approach. And so we were able to create a program that really was focused on maintenance. Which I'll get into a bit. So the first program that we created was focused on CMAQ. And this is called the Next Generation Solutions and Clean Air Program. So again, this is really focused on projects that address air quality, things like projects in our regional transit network, in our regional trails network. So we're not talking about road maintenance. We're talking about projects that really move the needle and help us get to our VMT GHG reduction goals. Also projects that increase modal choice and really manage congestion. Also looking for projects here that have climate adaptation and resilience, and also economic development, which is really inherent to a lot of improvements along our transportation infrastructure regardless. So in terms of project categories of what we're looking at for submittals when this program is open, transit capital improvements, clean fuel and zero emission, active transportation, congestion management, and travel demand management are some examples. These are all based on what the actual federal eligibility requirements are of the CMAQ program to begin with. These are not things that we have kind of created out of a vacuum. We're zeroing in on the things that we feel are really important to our region that are considered eligible under that program. On the STBG side, we have 2 programs that we've created. One is called the System Performance Program and one is called the System Preservation Program. So for the System Performance Program, this is really similar to what was previously known as maintenance and modernization in our past funding rounds. So this is looking at projects that are maintenance, but require additional benefits to be included in those projects. So really looking at safety as a key piece, obviously goods movement and modal choice, So transit is a project area that will be really interesting to see come through this. EV infrastructure, California is still moving forward with, their current mandates for both passenger vehicles, so charging requirements, but also on the transit capital side. So how can we help support those initiatives at the state level through our funding programs? And then trails and mobility hubs, so things that support alternative mobility options. On the system preservation program, this is one that is really, really new. This is a category that is specifically meant to address road preventative maintenance. This is something we haven't done before. But what we wanted to make sure that we were doing was focusing these dollars, because we can't fund every maintenance need in the region, wanted to focus those dollars on the corridors and routes in our region that see the most travel, that potentially have the most maintenance need. So thinking about transit routes and truck routes, existing commercial corridors or TOD areas where there's a lot of activity, existing active transportation facilities. So thinking about trails, we have a lot of money to build them, but there isn't necessarily a lot of money to maintain them. So we wanted to include those in this as well. And then obviously evacuation and emergency response routes. That's particularly important in our rural areas. We also added a new piece towards the end of our process where we wanted to include farm to fork and agritourism as well, which was another need identified in our more rural areas where tourism is a huge economic development generator, as well as just the agricultural industry itself. There's a lot of truck movements. A lot of going from farms to processing plants that puts a lot of wear and tear on some of those roadways, and we wanted to acknowledge that. So funding will be focused on that, and applicants will be required to kind of illustrate where in the region they are, why it's an important corridor, and how it meets these categorical needs. Yes. Yes. That's why we're here.
You're always taking care of me. Does SACOG do any lobbying to increase the amount of funding that becomes available? I know in the state, obviously, it's tough right now, but in this particular state transportation block grant, there's so much maintenance need right now.
Yeah, that's actually surface transportation block grants. So these are federal dollars. That's a typo in the presentation. So the surface transportation block grant funding is actually very flexible. So we can use that for kind of maintenance needs if needed. A lot of the maintenance funding that comes to our partner agencies is actually coming through kind of local sources, more so than federal dollars. So that is a lot of why, sales tax measures are really important for some of our jurisdictions. I would say that federal dollars are probably not where you want to rely most for your maintenance needs. Local and state dollars are where it's at. We don't particularly lobby in particular for those types of funding, but we do support our partners as they're looking at maybe putting out a sales tax initiative or something to that effect. Happy to help provide whatever support and advocacy we can to make sure that, your needs are being reflected.
I was just wondering, again, having just come on the heels of a failed revenue measure.
Right.
Just trying to scramble around for bucks. And it seems like everybody in the region has a road issue.
They do. And there's the constant push and pull right now of growth and expansion while not being able to maintain the existing infrastructure that you have. And so that's a big struggle, I think, right now for across the region that we've heard through our meetings. So.
Director Boomgarden, there's, because obviously we just came back from cap to cap, I think there's I second everything Christina just said, but the transportation reauthorization bill that some of us were in meetings on, so the Congress will begin rewriting the federal bill. And honestly, at this point, it's really making sure we don't have cuts to the overall program, making sure this program in particular stays around, and that it is what we call sub-allocated. So as Christina was mentioning earlier, all this money actually comes to the state, and then we're sub-recipients. But there is always a debate, discussion over how much should stay at the state level, how much comes down to us as a region. So we want to make sure ideally we'd increase that percentage, but at the very least we maintain it so that we have access and control over these dollars.
And kind of on that note too, so between the preservation, system performance programs, when we bring a budget to the board this fall for what this collective federal program is going to look like, the board is going to be tasked with a decision on how much of the funding should go towards the preservation program versus the performance program. Not too different than what you did for the state program earlier, where we had to come up with a split between the set aside and the competitive program, the intra-county program. We are going to need to understand the needs that our agencies have to help inform a decision on how that split should be. So over the next few months, we're going to be working, the transportation team is going to be working with all of the partner agencies to kind of get a sense of, we know that there's a lot of maintenance needs, like we know that. Giving us a dollar amount isn't necessarily going to help. It's more of what are the trade-offs between more money going to preservation versus the performance program and vice versa. So we're going to be working closely with the agency staff to kind of come up with some scenarios that we'll present to the board in the fall to help inform a split decision on that. Likely we'll come with a recommendation, but this one I think is going to be an interesting conversation to have, because I think there's the recognition that we cannot fund all of the maintenance. We've done a good job narrowing it down where we want those maintenance dollars to be focused, but we still can't tackle all of them. And we don't want to risk our ability to focus on other projects either in the system performance program that are equally as important to our region and us meeting our greenhouse gas goals, but also focusing on safety and a lot of the other initiatives in our region that are important to us. So kind of look forward to a discussion on that, but we're going to do some data collection in the coming months on that to help inform that discussion.
I have a quick follow-up.
Mhm.
So how much further along are we on this system-wide pavement management rating system?
Yeah, so that is, we're scoping that out right now. That is actually going to be part of the budget action that you take for the federal program. So that is a priority program as we've identified it. We can't get to work on that until we have the budget and the dollars to pay for that. But we are going to be ready to hit the ground running once we get that budget approved. So staff is currently working on a scope for that to kind of come together, which I'll talk about here on the next slide, actually. So you're right on track. So in addition to those bigger programs, we also have identified what we call priority programs. Some of these are not new. Spare the Air and CCAT are two that we support with the Air District. Sustainable Mobility, which was just recently known as Mode Shift, are grants that are focused on kind of transportation demand management type activities, supporting smaller dollar amount projects that help people use alternative modes. And then, of course, our Engage, Empower, Implement program that we just finished up the first round on there. But we do have two new programs that we're looking at. There's the Freeway Service Patrol, which we already support Freeway Service Patrol in the region. This is providing a little bit more support to some of the programs that currently exist in a new way that we haven't done before, as well as the Regional Pavement Management Program. So this is probably the more complicated one of the two new programs. This was really designed as a program to address what we kept hearing through our 2-year process, which was that not everybody has the same level of data on pavement management or pavement condition in the region. And it's really difficult for us to be able to help support people if we don't, nobody really knows what their conditions are. We want to get everybody to be at the same level, and we also want the data. It's helpful for us in our decision-making and the work that we do, but it's helpful to support our partners too. So we wanted to put together a program where we are going out and we are sort of identifying, collecting, putting together all of the data related to pavement management in the region, so that we all have the same information and we can make informed decisions. The board can make informed decisions as we go forward in funding maintenance projects in the future. So that is a really important one that I think will be probably about a 2-ish year process, I'm guessing. So it will be ready for the next time we do the federal funding round. It will not be ready for this one, which is okay. Because I think the way it's structured now, we'll be able to provide enough leeway for people to illustrate their issues without having, the same data across the board. Mhm. Can you use your microphone?
Yeah, it seems like it would be a wise idea to sync everybody's maintenance.
Yeah.
Paving maintenance. I know we're gonna get ours done, but it hasn't been done in a long time. And
Mhm.
so your data is only as good as how old it is. So
Right.
is there somehow a way for us to work on being more, I don't know, like if it's every 2 years you
Yeah.
need, or every 3 years or
Yeah.
whatever it is?
It's not a one-time thing. This is something that we're going to manage over the course of a number of years, if not decades, to make sure that we always have that information updated. So as agencies are doing their own work to understand what their conditions are on the ground, they'll need to report to us so that we can make sure that we're constantly updating. Yep. Which is why I think it's also a regional resource and database, not just for us, but for the partners too. So in terms of the timing and how this is all going to play out, on the 4-county side, David just did a presentation today to update on where we are with that STIP program. So we are in the middle of that right now. We've had draft applications that have already been submitted, and we're working collaboratively with our partners to score those and provide them the opportunity to make some changes for a final submittal in early June. From a process standpoint, we also have never done it this way. We are working as a team with our project applicants on the state side to make sure that they understand what STIP is. They've never had to think about it in this way before, and to understand our process. And we're really trying to make sure that people are successful. We don't want them to submit something to a black box and then cross their fingers and hope they get some funding. We want to be there helping them be successful and get funding for the projects that they need. So that is a very iterative process that I think is going to be really beneficial and something we can replicate for future programs. So we anticipate award recommendations in July and coming when you guys come back in August, having that as an action item on your August Transportation Committee and board meeting, and then initiate programming for those in March of 2026. These state dollars are being programmed out to fiscal year 27, 28, and 28, 29. So that's when the dollars will actually be available. So that is what our partners are focusing on when they're thinking about their project submittals. On the 6-county federal program side, the guidelines were adopted already last October by the SACOG board. So we are not making any changes to those. But what we will be bringing, as I mentioned, is our federal funding estimate or our budget for the federal program this fall, which will include that split. And it will also include funding for those priority programs and a little bit more detail on some of those priority programs. We anticipate a call for project sometime in late winter or early spring of 2026. This will give us time to do a lot of outreach with our partners to get as much information out on the new programs as we possibly can before we open them up. Again, wanting to work collaboratively with our partners and ensure that they're going to be successful. This one is going to be much more of a competitive across the 6-county process like folks are used to. It's just the programs are going to be significantly different, I think, than they were in the past, particularly because they're aligned with the funding sources themselves. So a little bit more kind of strategic thinking. As a reminder, we did limit applications. We don't have dollar amount limits for the federal programs like we have in the past, but we are limiting the number of applications that can be submitted. This will help kind of offset, there might be some bigger asks, but there'll be fewer of them. So it's three applications per program. So a total of 9 applications across those 3 programs for each agency in the region, which is pretty consistent with the number of applications we saw in past funding rounds anyway. We looked at kind of historical averages of what was submitted and took a look at that. So we anticipate, like I said, that being open in spring of next year, and then project awards and programming coming later in the summer and probably early fall of next year. So plan to do a lot of outreach once we get that federal funding estimate. Right now, we're working on performance target development with partners. We're going to start to talk about that with folks at our upcoming quarterly meetings. The performance targets are going to help us understand how funding might be awarded out across the 6 counties, and it's based on performance measures related to, you know, safety and, you know, maintenance needs and things like that. So we will be bringing an update to that. That will come with the federal funding estimate in the fall with the board, and we can provide an interim update if folks are interested in that on how that's shaping up. Perhaps in August we can bring that. But that's going to be a really important thing that we're working on with the partners too, that will help shape what the funding looks like for this program. So that is sort of the high level overview, but happy to answer any questions or provide any additional information that you might need as we go through this journey that never ends. That is the funding round.
I thought that was very detailed.
Good, I'm glad. I mean, you heard a little bit about this at the new board member orientation, and I know you've heard and seen little snippets of it at different board meetings. So we kind of wanted to put it all together for you so you're not seeing little snapshots, but if it's making sense, that's great. But there's a lot more to come and you will see a lot more of it. So please reach out to either myself or David. David is our new principal planner, if you haven't met him, who is overseeing funding and grants. And he will be your go-to guy for the details on this, but we're happy to provide as much information as we can.
Are always, when you talk about it, it's easy to understand and it's very difficult subject. And what they say 7 times you hear something might actually. So I'll be contacting you for sure, because especially the STIP funding for my municipality.
Yeah, I mean, Placer manages their own STIP funding in terms of how it's administrated. We coordinate because it still has to be consistent with our MTP and be put into our MTIP for programming. So we coordinate really heavily on that. Placer is interesting because they advanced a lot of their STIP to pay for, I think it's the 80-65 work. And so at some point that will, you know, come back online as a process that you all will be going through. But it is really important, and this is something that we've impressed upon the partners through this process, is even though we've had to break out STIP and the state funding from the federal, they really, as they're going through this process, need to be looking at it strategically of how it relates to what they're going to do on the federal side. Because prior, they would just submit all of the applications to one program, and that's what they did, right? So now they need to kind of think about it. What's the best fit? Where are we going to be most competitive? How can we leverage these programs to our benefit with the projects that we have? So there's been a little bit of some hand-holding, which is totally necessary to get folks to understand how these all work together when they haven't really had to think about them so separate before.
I'd like to say thanks for the hand-holding. It's going to be even more important for the city of Yuba City. We're losing some well-tenured staff.
Yeah.
So the outreach that you all provide to help us make a competitive and hopefully successful application is very much appreciated.
Yeah, well, we hope we're helpful. I don't know, David's been doing a really good job with the team working with folks, and we'll continue to find ways to educate. We'll do a bunch of, you know, workshops leading up to it and really just getting sort of like the roots of the programs. Hopefully get the staff comfortable with the roots of the programs. And then, like I said, we'll come up with a process maybe similar to what we're doing with the STIP side in terms of how we can really help make sure that they're successful through the process.
And appreciate everybody's comments, right, about the journey that we've been on, as Christina said. And I think we've said this before, but as we get into the federal funding round, we've never done this before across 6 counties, right? This was the corrective action that came to the state, actually for several regions, including ours, to say, these are federal funds, they're performance-based, they have to go to the projects that really meet the performance measures. So we are trying to align the programs to partly speak to the different parts of our region, right? System preservation, et cetera. But it will be, you know, we're hoping we get a pretty robust federal funding estimate. And, you know, honestly, the more funding we have, in some ways, the easier it is to kind of fund a variety of projects, right, in a variety of places. But we will definitely get to this point, not pretty soon in the federal funding round, especially on the awards, where some projects, many projects will not get funded, right? And some will be recommended for funding. And our goal in all of this is to be as transparent as possible with you, right? And to have you and your staff understand, as we said earlier this morning at the Transportation Committee, that early and often and frequent communication is the key, especially for the 2 counties that haven't been part of our federal funding round before. So.
Yeah, right now the federal funding estimate is somewhere around $180 million across the 6 counties. But again, that's early estimate. We need to firm some things up, and that depends on priority programs and things like that. So, but that's kind of around the ballpark of what we're looking for the 6 counties, which is 3 years worth of funding, and typically we kind of look at 2. So we're also recognizing that with Placer and El Dorado now being part of this process, we maybe needed to include another year and push it out a little bit to make sure it was meaningful and that we could actually fund a good number of projects, and not just a good number, but like good projects, right? It's not about the quantity, it's about the quality of the projects that we see too. So we've had to do a little bit of kind of thinking on that. And the programming for those projects is similar, the 27, 28, 28, 29 timeline as well. So again, that will be something that the partners will need to consider as they submit applications of when the dollars are available. All right.
Just push closer to you. April, on the side closest, push hard up. Yeah, there you go.
We didn't include that in the orientation. for the
Right.
board meeting.
That's the test that we have. Well, appreciate everyone's time. We'll make sure to send this out if you don't have it already, but if you want any additional information on any of this, please reach out and we'll be happy to send you what you need. Yeah, thanks for coming.